7 R&B legends, 7 deaths that silenced some of the most powerful voices in the history of music. These are the real stories behind how we lost the icons who defined soul, rhythm, and heartbreak for generations. Aaliyah. She was 22 years old and already one of the most important figures in R&B when she died on August 25, 2001. She had just finished filming the music video for Rock the Boat in the Bahamas and was boarding a small Cessna 402 aircraft at Marsh Harbor Airport with 8 other people for the flight back to Fort Lauderdale. The plane was overloaded. Investigators later determined it was carrying approximately 700 pounds more than its maximum weight capacity. The pilot, Luis Morales III, had a history of drug violations and was found to have cocaine and alcohol in his system at the time of the crash. The aircraft struggled to gain altitude after takeoff, clipped trees at the end of the runway, rolled, and crashed into the ground and burst into flames. All 9 people on board were killed. Aaliyah died at the scene. She was 22 years old. She had just completed filming Queen of the Damned and was preparing for one of the biggest chapters of her career. Her influence on R&B fashion and music production in the late 1990s and early 2000s was so profound that artists are still directly referencing her work today. The investigation revealed the pilot had lied on his license application about his drug history. The wreck was the result of an overloaded plane flown by someone who should never have been in that cockpit. She deserved better than that in every conceivable way. But if Aaliyah's death was the result of a catastrophic and avoidable failure, the next singer on this list was taken in a way that was equally sudden and equally impossible to make sense of. Selena. She was the queen of Tejano music, a genre she had essentially carried into mainstream American consciousness on her own. Through sheer talent, charisma, and relentless work ethic, she was 23 years old and on the verge of crossing over to mainstream English language pop in a way that would have made her one of the biggest stars on earth. On March 31, 1995, Selena Quintanilla Perez was shot once in the back at close range in a Days Inn motel room in Corpus Christi, Texas. The shooter was Yolanda Saldivar, the founder and manager of her fan club who had become the manager of her boutiques, and who had been accused of embezzling money from the business. Selena had confronted her about the missing funds. Saldivar produced a gun. Selena was hit in the right shoulder as she ran for the door. She made it to the motel lobby and told staff the name of her shooter before collapsing. She was rushed to Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital and was pronounced dead at 1:05 p.m. from blood loss caused by the gunshot wound. She was 23 years old. Yolanda Saldivar was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She will next be eligible for parole in 2025. The details of Selena's final moments, making it to the lobby, naming her killer, collapsing, are the kind of details that make the story impossible to forget and impossible to fully process. The next name on this list shows that even the most talented people are sometimes failed by the very people who are supposed to protect them. Marvin Gaye. The day before Marvin Gaye's 45th birthday, April 1, 1984, his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., shot him once in the chest at the family home in Los Angeles. Marvin died at California Hospital Medical Center about an hour later. The cause of death was cardiac arrest following the gunshot wound. The circumstances leading to that moment were complex and deeply troubled. Marvin had been living at his parents' home after a period of severe personal and financial decline, drug addiction, depression, tax problems, and a second marriage that was falling apart. On that afternoon, his parents got into an argument. Marvin intervened to defend his mother. His father, who had a history of domestic violence and whom Marvin had described as the greatest source of pain in his life, retrieved a .38 caliber revolver, a gun Marvin himself had given him as a Christmas present, and shot his son. Marvin Gaye Sr. was initially charged with first-degree murder. An autopsy later revealed he had a brain tumor that may have contributed to his behavior. The charge was reduced to voluntary manslaughter and he received a suspended sentence and 6 years probation. He died in 1998. Marvin Gaye was 44 years old. What I heard it through the grapevine. Sexual healing. Let's get it on. What's going on? The man who made those records was shot by his own father the day before his birthday. Some stories in music are so dark they barely feel real. The next one is just as hard to sit with. Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke was the first major crossover soul artist in American history. A man who moved from gospel to pop and R&B with a voice so pure and a charisma so natural that he made it look completely effortless. He was also one of the most important civil rights activists in popular music, using his platform and his money to support the movement at a time when doing so was professionally and personally risky. On December 11, 1964, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles by the motel manager Bertha Franklin. The official account was that Cooke had checked in with a woman named Elisa Boyer. That Boyer had fled with his clothes during an altercation, and that Cooke had then broken down the door to the manager's office in a state of distress. Franklin shot him once in the chest with a .22 caliber pistol. The coroner ruled the death a justifiable homicide. The case was closed. Almost immediately, the people who knew Sam Cooke best said the official account made no sense. His biographers, his family, and civil rights contemporaries, including Muhammad Ali, questioned the story for decades. The details of that night, the missing clothes, the timing, the woman who disappeared, have never been fully explained to the satisfaction of anyone close to him. Sam Cooke was 33 years old. A Change Is Gonna Come was released 3 weeks after his death. It became one of the most important songs in the history of American music. He never got to see what it meant to people. The next singer on this list also died violently, but in a way that no one anywhere came close to anticipating. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. She was the L in TLC, the group that became the best-selling female group in American music history with albums like Crazy, Sexy, Cool, and Fan Mail. She was also the most charismatic and unpredictable member of the trio, the one who set fire to her boyfriend's shoes in his bathtub and burned the house down, the one who wore a condom over her left eye, the one whose energy was completely singular and completely irreplaceable. On April the 25th, 2002, Left Eye was in Honduras on a spiritual retreat. She had been spending time there for several months and had been documenting her stay on video, something the camera crew continued filming on the day she died. She was driving a rented SUV with 8 passengers when she lost control of the vehicle, swerved, and overturned. Left Eye was thrown from the car and died from her injuries at the scene. She was 30 years old. The crash was captured partially on the camera that her crew had been using throughout the trip. She had told people around her in the days before that she felt a dark spiritual presence following her and had talked about death in ways that unsettled those close to her. Whether that was premonition or coincidence depends entirely on what you believe. What is certain is that she was 30 years old, at the peak of her creative powers, and the music world has never replaced what it lost that afternoon on a road in Honduras. The next singer on this list left a different kind of legacy. Decades of music and a death that came after a lifetime of quietly fighting his own body. Luther Vandross. He had one of the greatest voices in the history of RnB. A voice that could fill a room with warmth and make people feel things they could not put into words. He sold over 35 million records. He won 4 Grammy Awards. He had been open about his struggles with weight and his health throughout his career and had publicly battled obesity for decades. On April 16, 2003, Luther Vandross suffered a massive stroke at his home in New York. He had been preparing for a new album and tour at the time. The stroke was catastrophic. It left him unable to speak or walk. He spent the following 15 months in a rehabilitation facility, working with therapists but never regaining full function. He died on July 1, 2004 at JFK Medical Center in Edison, New Jersey. He was 54 years old. The cause of death was heart disease. His final album, Dance with My Father, recorded before the stroke and was released in 2003 and won 4 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, becoming the most successful album of his career. He was not able to attend the ceremony. His manager accepted the awards on his behalf. Luther Vandross spent the final year and a half of his life unable to speak and unable to sing, which by his own account was the thing that mattered most to him. He was 54 years old and left behind a catalog of music that will be played at weddings and slow dances for as long as people fall in love. The last name on this list closes with one of the most chaotic and tragic stories in the history of funk and soul. Rick James. Super Freak, Give It To Me Baby, Mary Jane. Rick James was one of the most outrageous, most talented, and most self-destructive figures in the history of R&B and funk. A man who described his own life as a constant battle between genius and addiction. That addiction kept winning. He spent years in prison for assault. He lost most of his prime creative years to crack cocaine. He made a comeback in the early 2000s, partly driven by Dave Chappelle's parody of him on Chappelle's show, a parody he reportedly found hilarious. On August 6, 2004, he was found dead at his home near Universal City in Los Angeles by his personal assistant. He was 56 years old. The Los Angeles County Coroner's report found 9 different drugs in his system, including methamphetamine, cocaine, Xanax, Valium, Wellbutrin, Celexa, digoxin, chlorpheniramine, and Vicodin. The official cause of death was pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. and heart failure as a result of acute combined drug intoxication. 9 drugs simultaneously. Rick James had survived prison, decades of addiction, a stroke in 1998, and more chaos than most people could endure in 10 lifetimes. He died at 56 with 9 substances in his body, alone at home, a month after Luther Vandross, and 3 years after Aaliyah and Left Eye in one of the most devastating stretches in RnB history. Those were 7 of the greatest RnB legends in history, and the real stories behind how they died. If this video hit different, subscribe to Cause of Death. New videos every week going deep on the most famous deaths in history across music, sport, and entertainment. Drop a comment telling us who you want covered next. We read every single one.